of Winborn, obviously, and my name is Wanda Pyle, and I am a retired educator. I retired from the Covina Valley Unified School District as a director of curriculum and instruction in 2012 and decided to follow my lifelong dream and start writing. So I have written 3 books. I've written Winborn, and I've written the first 2 in the Legacy trilogy. The first is the Stonehouse Legacy, which is here also, and the second is the Steel Canyon Legacy, and then I'm working on the 3rd one, which I hope to have out next year. What I write is family sagas, mid-century family sagas, so dealing with the 20th century for the most part. Winborn actually covers an entire century. I am descendant from a long line of educators, going back to my great-grandfather, who was an itinerant preacher slash educator, teacher. He went from settlement to settlement in the newly settled Midwest and taught, preached. And then his daughter became a 1-room school teacher. My mother became a 2-room school teacher. I became a teacher, and my daughter became a teacher. So it runs in the family, and as I was looking back on that, I noticed that that wasn't the only similarity that seemed to be passed down through the generations. If you looked at our the way we approached relationships, the men we chose in our lives, there's a pattern that was sort of passed down through the generations, and so that's what prompted me to write Winborn. It is written in a narrative form because I wanted to show both the male and the female side of their reactions to the world around them during the century, the big events during that century. So you get both. It is heavily narrative as opposed to action-based. It's more like you're looking down on these lives over the course of a century. Very different from my other 2 books, which are more action-based, but this one is more like you're observing these generations over time. So, that being said, I'm going to read today from the section. It's divided into 3 books. The first book, the second book deals mostly with World War II. So I wanted to read from that. And the interesting thing, or what I tried to do with this section, the war had different impact on different people. And it was very different from those on the home front to those on the war front. So I kind of wanted to show the contrast between that. You're going to get burned. I'm so worried about you.
Are you dying?
It's hot.
It is really hot.
Should we just go underneath the shade with you?
Yeah, why don't?
Okay.
That would be great.
Yeah, because we're
I
all
want to
like
hear your book.
really dying. It would be so much better. We can even just go over to where the plants are.
You want to take a chair?
Yeah.
If there was a breeze, it wouldn't be bad, right? Under this one over here with the plants.
It's too hot.
We'll figure it out. You're so fair. I was just you just were like getting red while I was.
I know. Let's just move all these around. Like this.
Put them in the shade so that you don't just die.
That's for yourself.
Okay. How's that? Everybody got a spot that's a little cooler?
I'll get a couple of you reading, then I'm coming on and listen.
So much better already.
Oh, yeah.
Jeez.
Well, you have a little more breeze. I could use one of those. Yeah. I should have brought those other things so you can fan yourself. Whew. Feels better already. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to read excerpts. I'm not going to read straight through because, like I said, it's narrative-based. And so I can pick out places and read, and you'll get the flavor of it, I think. Okay? All right, here we go. Will and Virginia huddled around the radio with their family, listening intently as President Roosevelt's voice crackled across the airwaves. Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, Members of the Senate and the House of Representatives. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Virginia covered her mouth to stifle a gasp, but no other sound except the voice of the President was heard in the room. The family listened in anxious silence as the President talked about the need for Americans to unite in defense of their country. When the President finished speaking, Will turned to face the ashen faces of his family. Their family had come of age as the country teetered on the brink of war. Charles had proven himself to be a natural leader. He had excelled in high school as a star athlete and class president. They had such high hopes for him. But Will couldn't shake the dread he felt at realizing that Charles was also a prime target for the nation's newly instituted military draft. Elizabeth was the intellectual one. She enjoyed science and had graduated #1 in her class, but she lacked the social skills of Janine and was often lonely. She had met and married a young hospital worker who had already been called to the draft. Will worried that she would soon become pregnant and be faced with raising the child on her own. Janine was cute and popular. She had a wealth of friends and was invited to all the best parties. She had done well in school, but her social life often interfered with her studies. Helen was born shortly after the family moved to Madison. They had been together with his brother, Floyd, in the small house, and Helen had found it easy to go unnoticed. She was extremely shy and emotionally fragile. She seemed to lack the self-confidence she would need to succeed on her own. "We've been through hard times before," Will said. "We are a strong family. We'll get through this as well." But as he faced the worried and expectant faces of his family, he knew that his words conveyed a confidence that he did not feel. The war in Europe ended the Great Depression. The great dust storms that had plagued the country had ceased, but the wind remained timeless and melancholy. People were worn out, but military spending that began in 1940 to bolster the defense effort gave the nation's economy the boost it needed. When the United States entered the war, however, everything changed. In January 1941, Congress established maximum prices on most commodities and rents and instituted a rationing program. As a result, the family dinner table and the local gas station became domestic war fronts. Prices for gas and oil escalated. Food also became an essential component of federal wartime rationing. Ration books were issued each month, along with a complicated point system for using them for the purchase of food. Like many others, William and Virginia planted a victory garden. It was a practical way to support the war effort. These little plots produced 40% of all the vegetables consumed during the war. Helen was still in high school when the war was declared. Although Charles had been called to the draft, she didn't really understand what was happening. She was incredibly shy and spent most of her school years in the shadow of her older siblings. Helen was terrified of leaving her familiar surroundings behind to attend school in Topeka, Kansas. But she couldn't disappoint her parents, who had sacrificed so much to give her this opportunity. With the onset of World War II, Forbes Air Base in Topeka became a major United States Air Force training center for pilots and air crews of fighters and bombers. Kansas was favored because of its excellent year-round flying conditions. The sparsely populated land made ideal locations for gunnery, bombing, training ranges, and increasingly college and universities like Washburn in Topeka provided training for war industry jobs. The effect of stationing thousands of men at the air base brought the reality of war to rural and small-town Kansas, and Topeka was soon crowded with recruits. At the onset of the war, Washburn Municipal University was one of over 100 colleges and universities nationally taking part in Navy College training programs, which offered students a path to Navy commissions by granting bachelor's degrees to future officers. Because of these programs, the enrollment at Washburn swelled to over 1,000 young men going to college under the Navy programs and about 500 young women. Her roommate thought Helen was terribly naive and took it upon herself to educate her in the ways of the world. She took her to dances and parties and taught her to smoke cigarettes. Helen's homesickness soon passed, and she began to relish her newfound self-confidence and independence. Helen passed the war years in a whirlwind of activity. Once she was out from under the shadow of her older siblings, she began to blossom on her own. She made many friends, and they played pranks on each other and went to dances. With the number of men far outnumbering the number of women in town, flyboys from Forbes Air Force Base often called the girls' dorm looking for dates. Helen had never been terribly popular in high school, so she was surprised and flattered by all the attention. For the first time in her life, she felt desirable. Her world was filled with parties and laughters. For the time being, the war was just a distant nuisance rather than a reality. Spring fever was rampant on the campus in 1942. The lush green lawns invited lovers' trysts, and young servicemen were very convincing in their pursuit of one last fling before being shipped off into the war zones. Helen's sister Janine had decided to join her at the university that year, and they roomed together in the dorm. Most of the servicemen they dated were fresh off the farm and eager for adventure. They had enlisted out of a sense of shock and revenge after Pearl Harbor, without thinking about what they might have to endure in battle. Helen loved college life. She worked, went on dates, managed to continue her studies. Her life was busy and active, and there was little time left for romance. The war had restored the self-confidence the country had felt prior to the Depression, and convinced people that what they wanted was within their grasp. It had promoted the growth of big business and solidified military-industrial links. The terrors of the battlefield were light years away, and Helen and her friends had trouble comprehending what is in store for most of the young men they dated. While her sisters waited in fear for the letter from the State Department telling them their husbands would not be returning, Helen enjoyed an active social life and a new sense of independence that she would not willingly give up. She left her small town ways behind and embraced her new life with confidence and excitement. The war had a dramatic impact on women. They substituted for men in the workplace, and for the first time in her life, Helen had plenty of money in her pocket. Pearl Harbor had united Americans, but it hadn't given them any sense of purpose larger than the instinctive drives for self-protection and vengeance. Even at the end of 1942, a full year after Pearl Harbor, most Americans did not feel they had a clear idea of what the war was all about. Helen and her friends understood with vague pangs of guilt that soldiers were undergoing a sacrificial ordeal on their behalf, but the battle seemed remote and far away. Change perspectives. At about the same time Helen was beginning her first journey away from home, Jack was nervously standing in line at the Olathe Naval Air Recruitment Center. He gave his decision only cursory consideration. The Army marched too much in mud, slept on the ground, and Marines were crazy for fighting and really gung-ho, and the Coast Guard had no glory. So Jack chose to enlist in the Navy. After years of living with emotional and physical abuse at home, he felt as if he had been fighting a war all his life. He was 6 months away from his 18th birthday, so he changed the date of his birth from December to July. No one questioned him. He filled out the required paperwork and sailed through what passed as a physical examination, and he was in. The only thing that remained was to call and tell his mother what he had done. "Raymond, do something," his mother wailed. "You can't let our only son go off to war." Raymond crossed his arms and looked disapprovingly at his son. "He's made his decision. Clearly our opinion is not important." "How could you do this without talking to us?" his mother cried. Jack stood painfully searching for words that would comfort his mother's sobbing. "Dad's right. I made the decision, so now I need to honor it." Then, echoing the sentiment of most young men who signed up during the patriotic fervor that followed Pearl Harbor, "Don't worry. The war will soon be over, and I'll probably be home by next Christmas." But Jack's mother could not be consoled. Jack packed his belongings and prepared to leave while his mother sobbed and his father stared blankly into his coffee cup. He kissed his mother goodbye and then stopped briefly at the door and looked back. His father sat at the table with his back to him, but did not get up. "Bye, Dad," he said. He waited a few minutes, but when there was no response, he left. In peacetime, the receding view of the beautiful curved bay in the Mediterranean Sea with a lazily smoking Vesuvius in the distance would have thrilled ship's passengers. But anxiety was high among the newer recruits who were faced with their first real battle of the war. Some attempted nonchalance by avidly playing card games. Others, like Jack, penned what they thought might be their last letters to loved ones. He had written to his mother faithfully since shipping out to the Mediterranean. His letters were filled with stories about life aboard ship and sights that he had seen. But he was careful not to disclose his exact location or what battles he had engaged in. He always closed his letters the same way. "Try not to worry. I'll be home soon. Tell Dad I love him. Love, Jack." No one knew exactly where they were headed, but a rehearsal for the operation had left little room for speculation. It had to be somewhere between Naples and Rome, right where the German strength was concentrated. The Philadelphia joined the gunfire support off Anzio on Valentine's Day, 1944. Jack was working as a hot shell man on one of the 5-inch 38 caliber guns on the bow of a ship that was used primarily to fire on land or as anti-aircraft. A crew of 5 men worked inside the turret and each had a job to do. Jack had taken over for a sailor whose arm had been injured by a flying shell. He wore a pair of asbestos gloves that went clear up to his shoulders, and his job was to catch the expended shell casing as it was ejected from the gun. If he didn't catch the shell, he was expected at least to deflect the brass casing out of the way. During heavy shelling on February 19th, Jack was at his post, and the gunner's mate had just verified that Jack's gun had returned to battery and was ready for the next round to be loaded. Suddenly, a live shell discharged backwards out of the gun and landed heavily on the arch of Jack's foot. He felt the bones snap and an excruciating